The Victorian mansion on Elm Street looked like something from a horror movie. Peeling paint, broken shutters, and a garden choked with weeds. Shella Martinez stood on the cracked front steps, 8 months pregnant and holding the rusty key her late grandmother had left her. Behind her, her husband's family whispered cruel jokes about the dump she'd inherited, calling it a burden they'd have to help dispose of. What they didn't know was that Shella's grandmother had been more than a quiet seamstress. She'd been a master art forger who'd spent decades creating perfect replicas for museums while hiding the stolen originals. And this mansion wasn't just a home, it was the world's most valuable secret vault. As Shella pushed open the front door, the floorboard beneath her feet gave way slightly, revealing something that made her heart race. A hidden mechanism. Her grandmother's final gift wasn't the crumbling house, it was what lay beneath it. But as headlights appeared in her driveway, Shella realized someone else knew about her inheritance. Would she uncover the truth before danger found her and her unborn child? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The musty air inside the mansion hit Shella like a wall of memories. Despite the decay, she could still smell her grandmother's lavender soap and the faint scent of turpentine that had always clung to her clothes. Shella had assumed it came from cleaning supplies, never imagining it was from the art restoration work that had made grandmother, Elena, one of the most sought-after forgers in the underground art world. "Dear God, it's worse inside than out," came the voice of Patricia Martinez, Shella's mother-in-law. The woman swept through the doorway in her designer coat, her perfectly manicured fingers covering her nose. "Marcus, darling, we simply cannot let Shella and the baby live in this squalor." Marcus, Shella's husband, nodded absently while typing on his phone. "I'm already calling real estate agents. We'll have this torn down and sell the land. Should cover the property taxes at least." Shella's heart clenched. "Wait, I want to look around first. Grandmother Elena loved this place." "Your grandmother was a sweet woman, dear, but clearly delusional about this property's value," Patricia said, her tone dripping with false sympathy. "The foundation alone would cost more than our country club membership to repair." But Shella was no longer listening. The floorboard beneath her feet had definitely shifted when she'd stepped inside. She knelt down carefully, her pregnant belly making the movement awkward, and ran her fingers along the warped wood. There, a small indentation that looked like it might accept a key. The rusty key in her hand suddenly felt warm. "What are you doing on the floor?" Marcus asked, finally looking up from his phone. "You'll hurt the baby." "I think there's something here," Shella whispered, fitting the key into the hidden slot. It turned with a soft click, and a section of the floorboard popped up slightly. Patricia let out an exasperated sigh. "Oh, for heaven's sake. Probably just old plumbing access. This house is falling apart, Shella. Can't you see that?" But as Shella lifted the wooden panel, she found herself staring down into what appeared to be a small, climate-controlled chamber. Inside, wrapped in pristine white cloth, lay what looked like a painting. Her pulse quickened as she carefully lifted it out. The cloth fell away to reveal a canvas that made her gasp. Even with her limited art knowledge, she recognized the distinctive swirls and vibrant blues immediately. It looked exactly like Van Gogh's The Starry Night. But that painting hung in the Museum of Modern Art in New York, didn't it? "What did you find, dear?" Patricia's voice had changed, becoming sharp with interest. Shella quickly rewrapped the painting, her mind racing. If this was what she thought it was, then the stories she'd dismissed as childhood fantasies might actually be true. Grandmother Elena had always told her tales of special work she did for important people, but Shella had assumed they were just games. The headlights that swept across the front windows made everyone freeze. "Were you expecting someone?" Marcus asked, peering through the grimy glass. Shella shook her head, carefully replacing the floorboard and pocketing the key. "No one knows I'm here except you." A car door slammed outside, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps on the front porch. The steps were deliberate, purposeful, Nothing like the casual approach of a neighbor or delivery person. "Hello?" a deep voice called from outside. "I'm looking for the property owner, Elena Vasquez's granddaughter." Patricia and Marcus exchanged glances. No one was supposed to know about the inheritance yet. The will had only been read 3 days ago. Shella's grandmother had always said that some secrets were too dangerous to keep and too valuable to reveal. As another knock echoed through the decaying mansion, Shella realized she was about to discover which category her inheritance fell into and whether she and her unborn child would survive the revelation. The Blackwood mansion loomed against the storm clouds like a monument to decay. Shella pressed her palm against her growing belly as the taxi pulled away, leaving her alone with the inheritance that had sparked 3 days of relentless mockery from her in-laws. A ramshackle old house that'll cost more to demolish than it's worth, Richard's mother had declared over dinner, her diamond earrings catching the light as she shook her head in theatrical dismay. Poor dear Shella, saddled with such a burden in her condition. The key felt cold and foreign in Shella's hand as she approached the front door. Paint peeled from the shutters like diseased skin, and several windows wore spider webs of cracks. But beneath the neglect she could see traces of former grandeur. Carved oak details, stained glass panels and stonework that spoke of craftsmen who built things to last centuries. The door opened with a groan that echoed through the empty foyer. Dust motes danced in shafts of weak sunlight that struggled through grimy windows. The air smelled of old wood, forgotten time and something else, something sweet and faintly metallic that made her stomach turn. Shella had only visited grandmother Cordelia twice as a child, brief encounters that left impressions of stern eyes and whispered conversations that stopped when children entered the room. Her mother had spoken little of Cordelia, only that she was complicated and lived too much in the past. Each room told a story of gradual abandonment. Furniture huddled under dusty sheets like ghosts at a funeral. Family portraits lined the walls, their subjects' eyes seeming to track her movement through their domain. She recognized her grandmother's sharp features in several faces, a genetic thread stretching back through generations of women who looked like they harbored secrets. In the study, leather-bound books filled floor-to-ceiling shelves. A mahogany desk dominated the center, its surface clear except for a single envelope bearing her name in Cordelia's spidery handwriting. Inside, she found a letter dated just 1 month before her grandmother's death. "My dear Shella, if you are reading this, then the house has chosen its next keeper. Pay no mind to those who see only decay and expense. They lack the vision to recognize what lies beneath the surface. The Blackwoods have always been survivors, adapting when others perish. You carry that strength now, in yourself and in the child you bear. Look beyond what others see. Some doors are meant to remain hidden until the right moment arrives. Trust your instincts. They will guide you when logic fails. Cordelia." The baby kicked as Shella finished reading, as if responding to some unspoken understanding. She folded the letter carefully, her mind racing with questions. What did Cordelia mean about doors? What was she supposed to look beyond? Thunder rumbled overhead as she continued exploring. The master bedroom contained a 4-poster bed draped in moth-eaten velvet. Family photographs crowded the dresser, weddings, christenings, formal portraits spanning decades. In several, she noticed her grandmother wearing an elaborate ruby necklace that seemed to glow even in the faded images. The basement revealed the house's bones, stone foundations and wooden beams that had weathered over a century of storms. But it was what she didn't find that puzzled her. The floor plan suggested the house should be larger. Counting windows from outside, there should have been at least 2 more rooms on the main floor. Returning upstairs, she paced the hallway, measuring distances with her steps. The library and sitting room were separated by a wall that seemed unnecessarily thick. Running her hands along the wood paneling, she felt for any irregularities. The pregnancy had sharpened her senses, making her hyper-aware of subtle changes in temperature, texture, and sound. Her fingers found a section where the wood grain didn't quite match, where the paneling felt slightly different under pressure. She pressed harder and heard a soft click. A section of the wall swung inward on hidden hinges. revealing a narrow passage that disappeared into darkness. The sweet, metallic smell she'd noticed earlier grew stronger, accompanied by something else, the faintest hint of roses, as if someone had once kept flowers in that hidden space. Shella's heart hammered against her ribs. She fumbled for her phone's flashlight, the beam revealing a few steps leading down into what appeared to be a small chamber. The walls were lined with metal filing cabinets and several large safes, their surfaces free of dust, as if they'd been regularly maintained. On a small table near the entrance, another envelope waited with her name. "You found it sooner than I expected," Cordelia's note read. "Intelligence was always your strongest trait. What lies in this room represents 5 generations of Blackwood women preparing for the future. Use it wisely, trust no one completely, and remember, power shared carelessly becomes power lost." Shella stepped into the hidden chamber, her phone light sweeping across documents, jewelry boxes, and items she couldn't immediately identify. Whatever secrets her grandmother had left behind, they were substantial enough to warrant this elaborate concealment. Outside, thunder crashed closer to the house, and she could have sworn she heard a car door slam in the driveway. The morning sun filtered through the grimy windows of grandmother's kitchen, casting long shadows across the warped wooden floors. Shella sat at the scratched oak table, nursing a cup of lukewarm tea and studying the stack of papers she'd found in the bureau drawer the night before. Her hand rested protectively over her growing belly as she squinted at the faded ink. Most of the documents were mundane, old utility bills, insurance papers, receipts for household repairs. But tucked between them, she'd discovered something curious, a hand-drawn map of the house that didn't match the actual layout. The sketch showed rooms that didn't exist, including what appeared to be a study behind the main staircase where she knew there was only a coat closet. "Probably just grandmother's confused memory in her final years," Shella murmured, but something nagged at her. Her grandmother had been sharp as a tack until the very end, still beating Shella at chess during their last visit. Her phone buzzed. "A text from Marcus. Mother wants to know when you'll be back. Dinner party tonight with the Ashfords. Don't embarrass us." Shella's jaw tightened. Even from 100 miles away, Victoria managed to make her feel small. She was about to type a curt response when another message appeared. "Also, found a buyer interested in the property. He's willing to make an offer sight unseen. Good news, we can be done with this mess." Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. They'd been married 3 years, and Marcus still made major decisions without consulting her. The familiar ache of loneliness settled in her chest. She turned off the phone and returned to the map. Standing, she made her way to the main staircase, studying the space behind it. The coat closet was narrow, barely deep enough for winter jackets. But, according to the map, there should be a room at least twice that size. She pulled out her phone's flashlight and examined the closet's back wall more carefully. The wooden panels looked identical to the rest of the house's interior, but when she pressed against them, one section felt different, slightly loose, as if it wasn't properly secured. Her heart began to race. She pushed harder, and the panel shifted with a soft click. The wall swung inward like a door. Shella gasped, stumbling backward. Cool air wafted from the opening, carrying the scent of old paper and leather. Her hands trembled as she aimed the phone's light into the darkness beyond. Stone steps descended into what appeared to be a basement room. The walls were lined with built-in shelves, and even from the doorway she could see they were filled with books, boxes, and objects that glinted in the flashlight beam. Her grandmother had mentioned the house having a root cellar, but this looked like something entirely different. Taking a deep breath, Shella eased herself through the opening and down the steps, one hand gripping the rough stone wall for support. The air grew cooler as she descended, and she pulled her cardigan tighter around her shoulders. The hidden room was larger than she'd expected, extending under what must be the entire front parlor. Heavy wooden tables occupied the center space, their surfaces covered with papers held down by ornate paperweights. The shelves contained hundreds of leather-bound books, their spines bearing titles in languages she couldn't read, but it was the far wall that made her breath catch. Oil paintings hung in neat rows, their rich colors vibrant despite the dim light. Even with her limited knowledge of art, Shella recognized quality when she saw it. These weren't amateur works or cheap reproductions. The brushstrokes, the depth of color, the elaborate gilded frames, everything screamed value. She moved closer, squinting at a small placard next to one painting. Her heart nearly stopped. The name was one she recognized from art history classes, a French impressionist whose works sold for millions at auction. "That's impossible," she whispered, but as she examined the other pieces, she found more familiar names, masters whose paintings hung in world-renowned museums. A leather portfolio on the nearest table caught her attention. Inside, she found certificates, documentation, and what appeared to be authentication papers for the artwork. Her grandfather's name appeared on several documents, along with signatures from galleries and auction houses she'd never heard of. As she turned to explore more of the room, something crunched under her foot. Looking down, she found fragments of what looked like an old photograph. She knelt carefully, gathering the pieces. When she tried to fit them together, she could make out part of an image, her grandfather as a young man, standing with several other people in front of a building with foreign writing on the facade. But it was the uniform her grandfather wore that made her blood run cold. The insignia, the styling, it was unmistakably German. World War II era. Her mind raced as pieces of a puzzle she didn't understand began forming a terrifying picture. Her grandfather had died when she was young, and the family never spoke much about his past except to say he'd been a successful businessman who'd immigrated after the war. Now, surrounded by priceless artwork in a hidden room, holding fragments of a photograph that suggested something far more sinister, Shella realized her inheritance might be worth more than she'd ever imagined, and that terrified her more than remaining poor ever could. The morning light streaming through the mansion's grimy windows revealed just how much work lay ahead. Shella stood in what had once been the grand foyer, her hand resting on her growing belly as she surveyed the peeling wallpaper and warped floorboards. Despite the decay, she could see glimpses of the home's former elegance, the intricate crown molding, the sweeping staircase with its hand-carved banister, the massive chandelier hanging precariously overhead. "Maybe we should have it demolished," Marcus said from behind her, his voice echoing in the empty space. He'd driven out reluctantly after she'd spent the night here against his wishes, bringing coffee and pastries as a peace offering. "You can't be serious." Shella turned to face him, noting the way he avoided touching any of the dusty surfaces. "This place has incredible bones. Look at this craftsmanship." Marcus handed her a cup of coffee, his expression softening slightly. "I just worry about you being here alone, especially in your condition. The place feels unstable." She accepted the coffee gratefully, the warmth spreading through her fingers. "I felt closer to Grandmother Rose here than I have anywhere else. There are so many rooms I haven't even explored yet." As if to prove her point, a door creaked somewhere in the depths of the house. Marcus tensed, but Shella smiled. "It's just the house settling. These old places are full of sounds." They spent the morning walking through the various rooms on the first floor. The library with its floor-to-ceiling shelves, most still filled with leather-bound volumes. The formal dining room with its massive oak table. The kitchen, which despite its age, had surprisingly modern fixtures that Rose must have installed in recent years. "I'll give your grandmother credit," Marcus admitted, running his finger along a pristine granite countertop. "She maintained the important things." It was in the afternoon, while Marcus took a business call outside, that Shella decided to explore the upper floors alone. The second floor held 5 bedrooms, each with its own personality. The master suite where Rose had slept still smelled faintly of lavender and old books. Shella lingered there, sitting on the edge of the bed and imagining her grandmother in this space. The third floor was smaller, containing what appeared to be servants' quarters from a bygone era. The rooms were cramped but charming, with sloped ceilings that followed the roofline. It was here, in the corner room facing east, that Shella noticed something odd. The room felt too small compared to its exterior dimensions. She paced off the length, then walked outside onto the small balcony to measure the wall from the outside. There was definitely a discrepancy, at least 8 feet of space unaccounted for. Back inside, she examined the walls more carefully. The far wall, painted the same faded blue as the others, had a slightly different texture. When she pressed against it, sections felt hollow, while others seemed solid. Running her hands along the surface, she found what felt like a hairline crack running vertically from floor to ceiling. Her heart began to race. Could there be a hidden room? Shella searched for any kind of mechanism, a switch, a lever, anything that might reveal a door. She pressed against different sections of the wall, pushed on the baseboards, even tried pulling on the decorative molding. Nothing. Then she remembered something from mystery novels she'd read as a child. Sometimes hidden rooms were accessed from adjacent spaces. She left the bedroom and examined the hallway wall that corresponded to the suspicious area. Here, a narrow bookshelf stood against the wall, filled with old household manuals and farming almanacs. When she tried to move the bookshelf, it shifted more easily than expected, as if it were on wheels. Behind it was a small brass lever, green with age. Her pulse quickened as she grasped it and pulled. A soft click echoed through the hallway, followed by the whisper of moving air. Back in the bedroom, a section of the wall had swung inward, revealing a narrow opening. Shella called out for Marcus, but heard only his muffled voice, still engaged in his phone call outside. Her curiosity overwhelming her caution, she used her phone's flashlight to peer into the opening. The space beyond was larger than she'd expected, perhaps 12 feet long and 6 feet wide. The beam of her light revealed wooden shelves lining the walls, and her breath caught as she saw what they contained. Paintings, dozens of them, wrapped in protective cloth and carefully stored. Even in the dim light she could see the quality of the frames, ornate, expensive-looking. She stepped inside, the floorboards solid beneath her feet despite their age. Unwrapping the nearest painting, she gasped. It was a landscape, beautifully rendered, with a signature in the corner she couldn't quite make out in the poor light. But the style, the technique, even to her untrained eye, it looked professional, valuable. The sound of Marcus calling her name from downstairs made her jump. Quickly, she rewrapped the painting and backed out of the room, her mind racing with questions. Why had Rose hidden these? What else might be in that room? As she reset the mechanism and moved the bookshelf back into place, one thought echoed in her mind. Maybe this inheritance was worth more than anyone had imagined. The dusty key felt warm against Shella's palm as she stood before the narrow door hidden behind the rotting wallpaper. Her heart hammered against her ribs, each beat echoing in the suffocating silence of the mansion's upper floor. The baby shifted restlessly in her womb, as if sensing her mother's anticipation. She slid the key into the lock. It turned with surprising ease, accompanied by a soft click that seemed to reverberate through the old house's bones. The door creaked open, revealing nothing but impenetrable darkness beyond the threshold. Shella fumbled for her phone's flashlight, the pale beam cutting through the gloom to illuminate a cramped staircase leading upward. The wooden steps looked ancient but solid, their edges worn smooth by countless footsteps. Dust motes danced in the light like tiny spirits, and the air carried a strange scent, not the musty decay she'd grown accustomed to throughout the mansion, but something else. Something that reminded her of her grandmother's perfume. Taking a steadying breath, she began to climb. The stairs groaned softly under her weight, but held firm. 15 steps brought her to another door. This one painted a deep blue that had somehow retained its vibrancy despite the years. Her grandmother's favorite color. Shella's throat tightened with unexpected emotion as she pushed it open. The room beyond took her breath away. Unlike the rest of the mansion, this space was pristine. Afternoon sunlight streamed through a large circular window, illuminating walls lined with built-in shelves that stretched from floor to ceiling. But it wasn't books that filled those shelves. It was artifacts, sculptures, paintings, jewelry, and objects she couldn't immediately identify, all arranged with museum-like precision. Shella stepped inside, her phone's light now unnecessary in the natural illumination. A mahogany desk dominated the center of the room, its surface covered with neat stacks of documents, ledgers, and what appeared to be authentication certificates. She moved closer, her eyes widening as she read the letterheads: Christie's, Sotheby's, private galleries from New York to London. Her grandmother had been collecting for decades. Shella's gaze swept the room again, this time with growing understanding. That small bronze sculpture on the nearest shelf, she'd seen something similar in a museum once. The painting propped against the far wall bore the distinctive brushstrokes of an artist whose works she'd studied in college art history. Even the jewelry displayed in glass cases looked far more sophisticated than anything she'd imagined her grandmother owning. She picked up one of the authentication certificates with trembling fingers. The document verified a Ming Dynasty vase valued at $250,000. The date was from just 3 years ago. "Impossible," she whispered, but her eyes were already finding the vase described in the paperwork, sitting innocuously on a middle shelf like any ordinary household decoration. Shella sank into the chair behind the desk, her pregnancy making her suddenly dizzy. She opened the topmost ledger, finding page after page of careful entries in her grandmother's familiar handwriting. Purchase dates, acquisition details, estimated values, insurance information. The numbers made her head spin. A Picasso sketch, $400,000. A collection of Roman coins, $75,000. A first edition manuscript by an author she'd never heard of, $120,000. The list went on for pages. Her phone buzzed, making her jump. Marcus's name appeared on the screen, but she declined the call without thinking. She couldn't deal with his family's condescension right now, not when she was sitting in a room that apparently contained more wealth than the Whitfield family's precious trust fund. But how had her grandmother afforded all this? The woman had lived modestly, never displaying any signs of wealth beyond basic comfort. Shella thought back to their conversations, searching for clues she might have missed. Her grandmother had traveled extensively in her younger years, before Shella was born. Had she acquired these pieces during those trips? She opened a different ledger, this one newer, and found correspondence with various dealers and auction houses. Her grandmother had been actively buying and selling, always upgrading her collection, always seeking something specific, though Shella couldn't determine what. Near the back of the ledger, she found a letter that made her blood run cold. It was dated just 6 months before her grandmother's death, written on expensive letterhead from a private investigator in New York. "Mrs. Whitfield," it began, "regarding your inquiry about the Whitfield family's interest in your property, I can confirm that your suspicions are correct. They have been monitoring your acquisitions for several years through intermediaries. I strongly advise against revealing the full extent of your collection until proper legal protections are in place." Shella's hands shook as she reread the letter. The Whitfields had been watching her grandmother. They knew about this room, or at least suspected its existence. The way they'd dismissed her inheritance as worthless, their casual cruelty about the mansion's condition, it had all been an act. They wanted this collection for themselves. The baby kicked sharply, as if responding to her surge of anger and fear. Outside, she heard the distant sound of a car door slamming. Her phone buzzed again, and this time it wasn't Marcus calling. It was her mother-in-law. The morning light filtered through the dusty windows as Shella made her way back to the hidden room, her heart pounding with anticipation. She'd barely slept, her mind racing with questions about what else might be concealed within those walls. The baby stirred restlessly in her womb, as if sensing her excitement. Marcus had left early for another meeting with his parents, presumably to discuss their financial situation, code for finding ways to pressure her into selling the mansion. The irony wasn't lost on her that while they schemed to dispose of her worthless inheritance, she might be sitting on a fortune that dwarfed their precious trust funds. She pushed aside the bookshelf more easily this time, her muscles remembering the motion. The hidden door creaked open, and she stepped into the secret chamber with her phone's flashlight cutting through the darkness. The jewelry box sat exactly where she'd left it, but now her attention was drawn to the rest of the room. Along the far wall stood a massive oak desk, its surface covered with what appeared to be architectural drawings and correspondence. Shella approached cautiously, her footsteps echoing in the confined space. The papers were yellowed with age but remarkably well preserved, protected from decades of humidity and decay. The architectural plans showed detailed blueprints of the mansion, but with curious modifications, additional hidden passages, secret compartments, and what looked like an underground tunnel system extending far beyond the property lines. Her grandmother's handwriting filled the margins in faded blue ink, noting dates and cryptic observations. One drawing caught her attention immediately. It depicted a network of tunnels connecting the mansion to several other properties in the area, including what appeared to be the old Blackwood estate, now owned by one of the wealthiest families in the county. The same family that had been trying to purchase surrounding land for years, always through intermediaries and shell companies. Shella's hands trembled as she examined a folder marked Correspondence, Confidential. Inside were dozens of letters spanning several decades, many bearing official government seals. As she read, a chilling picture began to emerge. Her grandmother hadn't just been an eccentric recluse. She'd been a keeper of secrets, dangerous ones. The letters revealed a web of corruption involving local politicians, wealthy landowners, and what appeared to be a systematic cover-up of environmental contamination. The Blackwood family's chemical plant, operational from the 1940s through the 1980s, had been illegally dumping toxic waste into underground caverns. The tunnel system beneath her mansion had apparently served as both an escape route and a monitoring station for the contamination. Her grandmother had been documenting everything. One letter, dated just 3 years ago, made Shella's blood run cold. It was from a law firm representing the Blackwood family, offering her grandmother an enormous sum, $10 million, for the immediate and unconditional sale of all property and associated mineral rights. The offer included a clause requiring the destruction of all historical documents and personal effects related to the property. Her grandmother had written "declined" across the letter in bold red ink. Shella sank into the desk chair, her mind reeling. This wasn't just about hidden treasure or family heirlooms. Her grandmother had been sitting on evidence that could destroy some of the most powerful families in the region, evidence that they'd clearly been desperate to bury along with her. The baby kicked sharply, and Shella gasped, placing a protective hand on her belly. Suddenly, the hidden room felt claustrophobic, the weight of her discovery pressing down like a physical force. She thought about her grandmother's sudden death, supposedly from natural causes. The timing seemed far too convenient now. A creaking sound from somewhere above made her freeze. Marcus wasn't supposed to return until evening, and she hadn't heard a car in the driveway. She strained to listen, but the old house was full of settling noises and phantom sounds. Still, every instinct screamed danger. Quickly, she gathered the most incriminating documents and stuffed them into a manila envelope. The jewelry box went into her purse. She couldn't risk leaving such obvious valuables behind if someone was indeed searching the house. As she prepared to leave the hidden room, she spotted something she'd missed before, a small digital camera, modern and out of place among the antique surroundings. Her grandmother had been more tech-savvy than anyone realized. Shella pocketed the camera and carefully reset the room, ensuring everything appeared undisturbed. She slid the bookshelf back into position just as the front door creaked open downstairs. "Shella?" Marcus's voice echoed through the house, but something in his tones sounded different, strained. "We need to talk." She clutched the envelope to her chest, her heart hammering as footsteps approached the library. Through the window she could see a black sedan in the driveway that definitely didn't belong to Marcus. Whatever game she'd stumbled into was far from over, and she was beginning to realize she might not be the only player who knew the rules. The lockbox sat heavy in Shella's trembling hands as she made her way back to the main house. The weight of it seemed to increase with each step, not from its physical mass, but from the implications of what lay inside. Her grandmother's final words echoed in her mind, "Trust no one with this burden." The cryptic warning felt more ominous now, surrounded by the mansion's creaking shadows. Back in the kitchen, she set the box on the worn wooden table and stared at it for a long moment. The brass fittings caught the afternoon light streaming through the dusty windows, and she could see her own reflection distorted in its polished surface. Her pregnancy made her feel vulnerable in ways she'd never experienced before, not just physically but emotionally exposed to dangers she couldn't yet comprehend. The key turned smoothly in the lock, and the lid opened with a soft click. Inside, wrapped in yellowed silk, lay a collection of documents that would change everything she thought she knew about her family. The first item was a birth certificate, her grandmother's, but with a name Sheila had never heard, Elizabeth Rothschild Blackwood, not the simple Elizabeth Manning she'd known all her life. Below that lay a marriage certificate to a man named Heinrich Rothschild, dated 1943. Her hands shook as she realized the implications. Her grandmother had been married before her grandfather, during World War II, to someone whose surname carried weight in international banking circles. Deeper in the box, she found a leather journal bound with a ribbon. The pages were filled with her grandmother's careful handwriting, documenting transactions that spanned decades. Bank account numbers in Switzerland, property deeds across Europe, stock certificates for companies Sheila recognized as multinational corporations. The numbers made her dizzy, millions upon millions of dollars, carefully hidden and maintained across multiple countries. But it was the final document that made her blood run cold. A letter, written in her grandmother's hand but dated just 6 months ago, addressed to her directly. "My dearest Sheila," it began, "if you are reading this, then I am gone, and the burden I have carried for 70 years now falls to you. The Blackwood family believes they destroyed us in 1943, taking everything we had built over generations. They were wrong. Heinrich and I moved our fortune before they could seize it, but the cost was higher than money. We lost our first child, our home, and ultimately each other. I took the name Manning and disappeared into America, but I never forgot, and I never forgave." Sheila's chest tightened as she continued reading. Her grandmother detailed how she had spent decades carefully tracking the Blackwood family's business dealings, using their own greed against them, slowly and methodically destroying their empire from within while building her own hidden wealth. "The Blackwoods own the bank that holds your husband's family fortune," the letter continued. "They have been watching you since Marcus first mentioned your name. Your marriage was not the coincidence you believed it to be. They know who you are, child. They have always known." The pages slipped from Sheila's numb fingers as the full horror of her situation became clear. Marcus's family hadn't just been cruel about her inheritance. They had been playing a much deeper game. Every interaction, every cruel comment, every attempt to make her feel small and worthless had been calculated moves in a 70-year-old war of revenge. She thought about Victoria's reaction to news of the inheritance, how quickly she had dismissed it as worthless. The way Marcus's father had insisted on seeing the property documents, their sudden interest in renovating the mansion for the baby. None of it had been about helping her. They had been searching for exactly what she had just found. A sound from outside made her freeze. Car doors slamming, voices carrying across the yard. Through the window, she could see Marcus's silver BMW pulling up the circular drive, followed by a black sedan she didn't recognize. Victoria stepped out of the BMW, her perfectly styled hair incongruous against the mansion's decay, while 2 men in dark suits emerged from the sedan. Panic flooded through her as she realized she was trapped. The lockbox was open on the table, documents spread across the surface, her grandmother's secrets exposed. If they found her here like this, with the evidence of the hidden fortune visible, she didn't know what they might do to protect their own interests. Moving as quietly as her pregnant body would allow, she gathered the papers and shoved them back into the lockbox. The voices were getting closer, Victoria's sharp tone cutting through the afternoon air as she directed the men toward different entrances of the house. They were planning to search the mansion systematically, and Sheila was running out of time. She clutched the lockbox against her chest and headed for the servants' staircase, her heart pounding so hard she was sure it would give her away. Whatever game the Blackwoods thought they were playing, the rules had just changed completely. But first, She had to survive long enough to figure out her next move. Shella's hands trembled as she held the photograph, studying the faces of people who had lived and died decades before her birth. The woman in the center bore such a striking resemblance to her grandmother that it took her breath away. But it was the man standing beside her, his arm possessively wrapped around her waist, that made Shella's blood run cold. She knew that face. It stared back at her from oil paintings hanging in the Blackwood family estate, from newspaper clippings about successful business ventures, from the family tree Marcus had proudly shown her during their engagement. The man in the photograph was unmistakably a Blackwood ancestor, Marcus's great-grandfather, if she remembered correctly. "That's impossible," she whispered to the dusty air. But the evidence was undeniable. The photograph showed her grandmother as a young woman, perhaps 25, wearing an elaborate wedding dress. The man beside her wore a formal suit, and both were smiling with the radiant joy of newlyweds. Behind them stood what appeared to be this very mansion, but in its former glory, pristine white columns, manicured gardens, and windows that gleamed like jewels in the sunlight. Shella sank into the wooden chair, her mind racing. If her grandmother had been married to a Blackwood, why had she never mentioned it? Why had the family never acknowledged her? And most importantly, what did this mean for Shella herself? She rifled through more papers in the chest, finding marriage certificates, property deeds, and correspondence that painted a picture of a life she never knew existed. Her grandmother hadn't just been married to a Blackwood, she had been the legitimate heir to a portion of their vast fortune. Documents showed joint ownership of several properties, including this mansion and what appeared to be substantial investments in the family's early business ventures. A letter dated 1952 caught her attention, written in her grandmother's delicate handwriting. "My dearest Charles, they cannot simply erase me from existence. I have rights, legal claims that go beyond their prejudice and their pride. The child I carry, your child, deserves better than to be cast aside like an inconvenience. I will fight for what is mine, for what is ours. Forever yours, Eleanor." Shella's hand instinctively moved to her own pregnant belly. The parallels were too stark to ignore. A pregnant woman, cast out by the Blackwood family, fighting for her rightful inheritance. History seemed to be repeating itself with cruel precision. More letters revealed the full scope of the betrayal. After Charles Blackwood's sudden death in 1953, his family had systematically erased all evidence of his marriage to Eleanor. They had used their wealth and influence to challenge the legitimacy of the union, claiming the marriage certificate was fraudulent. They had seized control of shared assets, changed property deeds, and even went so far as to bribe officials to alter public records. Eleanor had fought back through the courts for years, but the Blackwoods' resources were overwhelming. Eventually, broken and financially ruined, she had retreated to this mansion, the one property they couldn't legally take from her, as it had been a wedding gift from her own family. A thick folder contained legal documents spanning decades. Eleanor had never given up her fight. She had simply taken it underground. She had quietly gathered evidence, documented every theft, every fraudulent claim, every bribe. She had traced bloodlines, collected testimonies from witnesses, and meticulously built a case that would have brought down the Blackwood Empire. But she had died before she could use it. Shella found Eleanor's will, dated just weeks before her death. It left everything to her only living descendant, her granddaughter, along with a letter marked for Shella's eyes only. With shaking fingers, she opened the sealed envelope. "My precious granddaughter, if you are reading this, then fate has finally brought justice within reach. You are not just my heir. You are the rightful heir to half of everything the Blackwoods possess. Their fortune was built on theft, their empire founded on lies. I could not fight them alone, but perhaps you can succeed where I failed. The evidence is all here. Guard it carefully, for they will kill to protect their secrets. You have more power than you know. Use it wisely. All my love, Grandmother Eleanor." Shella's phone buzzed, making her jump. "A text from Marcus coming over to check on you. Be there in an hour." Panic shot through her as she realized the magnitude of what she had discovered. Marcus's family had stolen her grandmother's life, her happiness, her fortune. They had condemned Eleanor to decades of poverty and obscurity while they prospered on wealth that was partially hers by right. And now they were trying to do the same thing to Shella. She quickly gathered the most important documents, stuffing them into a small bag. The hidden room had protected these secrets for 70 years. It would have to keep them safe a little longer. But first, she needed to understand exactly what she was dealing with and figure out who she could trust. As she sealed the room and replaced the bookshelf, one thought echoed in her mind. The Blackwoods had no idea what they had awakened. The weight of Margaret's diary pressed against Shella's chest as she made her way back through the mansion's shadowy corridors. Every creak of the floorboards seemed amplified in the silence, and she found herself glancing over her shoulder despite knowing she was alone. The revelations from the hidden room had left her mind reeling. Her great-grandfather's war crimes, the stolen Nazi gold, and most disturbing of all, the suggestion that people had died to protect these secrets. She paused at the top of the grand staircase, her hand instinctively moving to her rounded belly. The baby kicked as if sensing her distress, and she whispered a soft apology to her unborn child for the darkness they were inheriting along with this cursed house. The sound of gravel crunching under tires made her freeze. Through the tall windows flanking the front door, she could see headlights cutting through the evening gloom. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she recognized the sleek black sedan, Richard's car. What was her father-in-law doing here at this hour? Panic seized her. The diary, the photographs, the gold bars, everything was evidence of crimes that could destroy not just the Wellington family reputation, but potentially implicate them all. She clutched the diary tighter and hurried toward her bedroom, her mind racing through possible hiding places. The front door's heavy brass knocker echoed through the mansion like gunshots. Shella shoved the diary under her mattress, then thought better of it. Too obvious. She yanked it out and looked frantically around the room. The baby kicked harder now, responding to her elevated stress. "Breathe," she whispered to herself, forcing her shoulders to relax. "Just breathe." The knocking came again, more insistent this time. Shella smoothed her hair and made her way downstairs, trying to arrange her features into something resembling normalcy. Through the door's glass panels, she could see Richard's imposing silhouette, his silver hair gleaming under the porch light. "Richard," she said, as she opened the door, hoping her voice sounded steadier than she felt. "This is unexpected." Shella, his cold blue eyes swept over her, taking in her disheveled appearance with obvious disapproval. "We need to talk." He stepped past her without invitation, his expensive shoes clicking authoritatively on the marble floor. The scent of his cologne, something woody and aggressive, filled the entryway, making her slightly nauseous. "About what?" she asked, closing the door with hands that trembled only slightly. Richard turned to face her, and something in his expression made her blood run cold. There was a calculating quality to his gaze, like a predator sizing up prey. "About what you found in this house." The words hit her like a physical blow. Her mouth went dry, and she felt the baby give another sharp kick, as if warning her of danger. "I don't know what you mean," she managed, but even to her own ears, the denial sounded weak. Richard's lips curved into what might have been a smile if there had been any warmth in it. "Come now, Shella. Did you really think we didn't know about the hidden room? About what your great-grandfather left behind?" The mansion seemed to shrink around her, the walls pressing closer with each word. "You knew?" "Of course we knew." Richard began walking deeper into the house, his hands clasped behind his back, like a general surveying conquered territory. "Why do you think we've been so eager to get our hands on this property?" It certainly wasn't for the architectural charm. Shella followed him into the parlor, her legs feeling unsteady beneath her. "The whole time, even when you were mocking the inheritance, calling it worthless, a necessary performance, I'm afraid. We needed you to discover it yourself, to take ownership of the secret." He settled into one of the antique chairs as if he owned the place, much cleaner that way from a legal standpoint. Legal standpoint? The room felt like it was tilting. You're talking about stolen Nazi gold, Richard, war crimes, murder. I'm talking about family legacy. His voice remained calm, conversational even. Your great-grandfather was a patriot who secured assets for the Allied cause. The methods may seem questionable by today's standards, but war requires difficult choices. Patriot? Scheller's voice cracked with disbelief. He was working with the Nazis, helping them move stolen treasure. He was infiltrating their operation. Richard cut her off sharply, gathering intelligence, redirecting resources. The gold you found was liberated from Nazi coffers and hidden here for safekeeping until it could be properly distributed. The lies rolled off his tongue so smoothly that for a moment Scheller almost wanted to believe them. It would be easier than accepting the truth, that her family legacy was built on blood and betrayal. That's not what Margaret's diary says. Richard's composure cracked just slightly, a flicker of something dangerous crossing his features. You found Margaret's diary. Too late. Scheller realized her mistake. She'd revealed too much, shown her hand when she should have stayed silent. Where is it, Scheller? The morning sun cast long shadows through the mansion's dusty windows as Scheller descended the creaking staircase, her hand instinctively resting on her growing belly. The events of the previous night felt surreal, the hidden room, the documents, the revelation that her grandmother had been protecting something far more valuable than anyone could have imagined. But now, in the harsh light of day, doubt crept in like cold fingers around her heart. Marcus was already in the kitchen, nursing a cup of coffee and scrolling through his phone. He looked up as she entered, his expression unreadable. Sleep well? His tone was casual, but she caught the undercurrent of tension, as well as can be expected. She moved to the cabinet, retrieving a mug with trembling hands. The weight of their shared secret hung between them like a physical presence. Marcus, about last night, we need to be careful who we trust, he interrupted, his voice low. Those documents. If the wrong people find out what we've discovered, we could be in serious danger. Scheller poured herself tea, the steam rising in delicate spirals. What do you mean, the wrong people? Before Marcus could answer, the sound of tires on gravel echoed from outside. They exchanged glances, and Marcus moved to the window, peering through the faded curtains. His face went pale. It's Richard and Vivian, and they're not alone. Scheller's stomach clenched as she recognized the sleek black sedan following her in-law's Mercedes. 3 men in expensive suits emerged from the vehicle, their movements precise and purposeful. Everything about them screamed corporate authority and barely contained menace. Who are those men? She whispered, joining Marcus at the window. I don't know, but they look like lawyers, or worse. Marcus turned away from the window, his jaw set. Quick, we need to secure the room upstairs. Make sure everything looks normal. They rushed upstairs, Scheller's heart pounding as they carefully repositioned the bookshelf to conceal the hidden entrance. Marcus gathered the documents they'd left scattered on the desk, tucking them into a manila envelope. Hide this, he said, pressing it into her hands. Somewhere they'll never think to look. The doorbell's harsh chime echoed through the mansion, just as Scheller slipped the envelope beneath a loose floorboard in her grandmother's bedroom. She took a deep breath, smoothing her hair and trying to compose herself before descending to face whatever storm awaited. Richard stood in the foyer like a conquering general, his silver hair perfectly styled despite the early hour. Vivian flanked him, her designer handbag clutched like a weapon. The 3 strangers lurked behind them, their cold eyes scanning the interior with professional interest. Scheller, darling, Vivian's voice dripped false sweetness. We've brought some associates who are very interested in your little inheritance. Mr. Thornton here represents a development company that specializes in historical renovations. The tallest of the 3 men stepped forward, extending a manicured hand. Mrs. Blackwood, I'm Jonathan Thornton of Thornton & Associates. Your in-laws have told us so much about this charming property. His smile never reached his eyes. We'd be very interested in making you an offer that would solve all your financial concerns. Shella forced herself to remain calm, though every instinct screamed danger. I'm not interested in selling. This house has sentimental value. Of course it does. Thornton's voice was silk over steel. But sentiment doesn't pay for medical bills or provide for a growing family. We're prepared to offer significantly above market value. How significantly? Marcus asked, appearing beside Shella with protective closeness. Richard's laugh was sharp. More than this crumbling pile of bricks is worth, certainly. 300,000, cash, closing within the week. The offer was generous. Too generous for a house they'd previously dismissed as worthless. Shella's mind raced. What had changed? What did they know? That's very generous, she said carefully, but I'll need time to consider. Time is unfortunately something we don't have much of, Thornton interrupted smoothly. This offer is contingent on immediate acceptance. The market for properties like this is volatile. One of his companions moved away from the group, ostensibly admiring the architecture, but Shella noticed his eyes cataloguing every detail, every potential hiding place. Her blood turned to ice as his gaze lingered on the staircase leading to the upper floors. I need to discuss this with my husband, Shella said, her voice steadier than she felt. Of course, Thornton nodded. But understand, Mrs. Blackwood, that some opportunities don't come twice. This house, it has a fascinating history. Sometimes the past has a way of catching up with the present in unexpected ways. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. As Thornton's cold gaze met hers, Shella realized that her discovery had somehow triggered something far more dangerous than she'd imagined. Whatever secrets her grandmother had protected were valuable enough to draw predators from the shadows. And now, with her unborn child to protect, Shella found herself trapped between family greed and forces she didn't understand, fighting a battle her grandmother had begun decades ago. The antique shop's bell chimed as Shella pushed through the door, her heart hammering against her ribs. The musty scent of old wood and forgotten memories enveloped her as she clutched the leather-bound journal tighter to her chest. Behind the counter, an elderly man with wire-rimmed glasses looked up from cataloguing a collection of porcelain figurines. We're closing soon, dear, he said kindly, then noticed her pale complexion. Are you all right? Shella approached the counter, her legs unsteady. I need to know about this. She placed the journal on the glass surface with trembling hands. My grandmother left it to me, but I think it might be connected to something terrible. The shopkeeper, whose nameplate read Harold Grimsby, adjusted his glasses and carefully opened the journal. His expression shifted as he examined the pages, his weathered fingers tracing the entries with surprising reverence. Where did you say you found this? His voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. In a hidden room, in my grandmother's house. Shella's hand instinctively moved to her growing belly. There were other things too, jewelry, paintings, documents, but this journal, it talks about people who disappeared. Harold's face went ashen. He closed the journal and looked directly at her. Your grandmother was Rose Blackwood? The confirmation sent a chill down Shella's spine. You knew her? Not personally, but I know the stories. Harold walked to the front door, turning the lock and flipping the sign to closed. My father used to tell me about the Blackwood family, about the things that happened in that house during the war years. Shella sank into a nearby chair, her mind reeling. What kind of things? Harold returned, pouring 2 cups of tea from a pot he kept behind the counter. Your grandmother wasn't just hiding valuables during the war, dear. She was hiding people. Jews fleeing persecution, resistance fighters, anyone who needed sanctuary. But there were others who wanted to exploit that desperation. The teacup rattled against its saucer as Shella's hands shook. What do you mean? There was a network of people who pretended to help refugees, only to rob them of everything they had before making sure they could never tell anyone about it. Harold opened the journal again, pointing to specific entries. Look at these dates. Look at the names your grandmother recorded. Shella leaned forward, studying the careful handwriting she'd come to recognize as her grandmother's. The entries detailed arrivals and departures, but some people only had arrival dates, no departures. Next to those names, her grandmother had written small symbols, crosses, stars, cryptic notations that suddenly made horrifying sense. She was keeping track, Shella whispered. She knew what was happening to them. Your grandmother was documenting evidence of murder. Harold's voice was grave. She was building a case against someone, but she never lived to see justice done. A sudden bang against the shop's front window made them both jump. Through the glass, Shella could see a figure in a dark coat, face obscured by the evening shadows. The person stood motionless for a moment before walking away. "We need to contact the police," Harold said, moving toward the telephone. "No," Shella grabbed his arm. "Not yet. I need to understand everything first. If this journal contains evidence of crimes, then whoever committed them might still be alive, might still be dangerous." Harold studied her face. "You think someone else knows about what you found?" Before she could answer, her phone buzzed with a text message. The number was unknown, but the words made her blood run cold. "Stop digging, or your baby pays the price." The phone slipped from her nerveless fingers, clattering onto the floor. Harold picked it up, reading the message, his face darkening. "How did they get your number? How do they even know you're pregnant?" His eyes widened with realization. "Someone's been watching you." Shella's mind raced through the possibilities. The lawyers who'd handled the inheritance, the contractors who'd been working on the house, Marcus's family, who'd been so interested in her worthless inheritance. Or worse, someone who'd been connected to the original crimes, someone who'd been waiting all these years for the truth to surface. "I have to go back to the house," she said, standing abruptly. "There might be more evidence, something that could identify who's behind this." "That's exactly what they're expecting you to do," Harold warned. "You're walking into a trap." The baby kicked inside her as she stepped out into the darkening street, as if sensing the danger that surrounded them both. She had to find the truth before the truth destroyed everything she held dear. The lockbox key trembled in Shella's fingers as she descended into the mansion's basement, Marcus close behind her. The musty air seemed thicker now, pregnant with secrets that had festered in darkness for decades. Their flashlight beams cut through the shadows, revealing stone walls that wept with moisture and memories. "There," Marcus whispered, pointing to a section of wall where the mortar looked newer, hastily applied. "Behind that." Shella's heart hammered against her ribs as they pried away the loose stones. The hidden compartment was smaller than she'd expected, but what it contained made her breath catch. 3 lockboxes, identical to the one upstairs, sat nestled in velvet-lined alcoves like sleeping serpents. The first key worked with a satisfying click. Inside, yellowed documents bore official seals and signatures that made Shella's world tilt sideways. Property deeds to half of downtown, stock certificates for companies she recognized from financial news, and bank account numbers with balances that made her grandmother's modest inheritance look like pocket change. "Jesus," Marcus breathed, reading over her shoulder. "Your grandmother wasn't just wealthy, Shella. She was one of the richest women in the state." But it was the second box that made everything clear and infinitely more dangerous. Inside lay a leather journal, its pages filled with her grandmother's precise handwriting. As Shella read, the blood drained from her face. Names she recognized from the Hartwell family tree appeared alongside dollar amounts, dates, and detailed descriptions of threats made and received. Her grandmother hadn't just been wealthy, she'd been a blackmailer. "The Hartwells weren't the only ones," Shella whispered, her voice hollow. "She had dirt on everyone. Politicians, judges, business leaders." She flipped through pages of documented affairs, bribes, murders covered up, evidence destroyed. "This isn't just about money, Marcus. This is about power, about controlling the most influential people in 3 states. The journal detailed how her grandmother had systematically gathered compromising information, using her social connections and charitable work as cover. Tea parties became intelligence-gathering operations. Charity galas turned into evidence collection events. For 40 years, she'd built an empire of secrets. "Look at this," Marcus said, pointing to an entry dated just months before her grandmother's death. She was planning to expose everything. Says here she was tired of living with the weight of other people's sins. Shella's blood ran cold as she read the entry. Her grandmother had scheduled meetings with journalists, prepared evidence packets, even written a preliminary exposé. But then the entries stopped abruptly. "They killed her," she whispered. "The Hartwells, or someone else she was blackmailing. They found out what she was planning and they killed her." A sound from upstairs made them both freeze, the unmistakable creak of the front door opening. "Shella?" a voice called out, saccharine, sweet and familiar. "Victoria Hartwell, I saw your car in the driveway. We need to talk, dear." Marcus grabbed Shella's arm. "We have to get out of here." But Shella was already opening the third lockbox, driven by desperate intuition. Inside, she found a small digital recorder and a manila envelope marked insurance policy. Her hands shook as she pressed play. Her grandmother's voice, weak but determined, filled the basement. "If you are hearing this, then they've killed me, just as I suspected they would. Everything you need is in this room. But Shella, my darling girl, you must be careful. They won't hesitate to kill you too." The recording detailed hiding places for evidence, safe deposit box numbers, and the names of 3 journalists who could be trusted with the story. But the final revelation made Shella's knees buckle. The mansion itself is the key. Built in 1887, it was designed with hidden passages throughout. The servants used them, but so did others. Politicians conducting illegal business, judges taking bribes, families hiding their darkest secrets. I installed cameras in every passage 30 years ago. I have recordings of everything. Footsteps echoed overhead now, moving purposefully through the house. Victoria wasn't alone. Shella could hear at least 2 other sets of footsteps, heavier, more deliberate. "Shella, darling, I know you're here somewhere," Victoria's voice carried down through the old floorboards. "We really must discuss your grandmother's belongings. Some things are far too dangerous for expectant mothers to handle." The threat was barely veiled. Shella stuffed the journal, recorder and documents into her jacket, her baby pressing against her ribs as if sensing the danger. "There's got to be another way out," Marcus whispered urgently. Shella's mind raced, remembering her grandmother's words about hidden passages. She ran her hands along the basement walls until she found it, a section that gave slightly under pressure. It swung inward, revealing a narrow tunnel that smelled of earth and decades-old secrets. As they squeezed into the passage, pulling the hidden door closed behind them, Shella heard Victoria's voice again, closer now, tinged with frustration and barely controlled rage. "Find her. Find her now, and this time make sure there are no survivors." The tunnel stretched ahead into darkness, their only hope of escape, and of finally exposing the truth that had cost her grandmother her life. The brass key felt ice-cold in Shella's trembling fingers as she approached the ornate chest that dominated the hidden room's far corner. Behind her, Marcus stood guard at the entrance, while Elena paced nervously, her designer heels clicking against the ancient stone floor. "We shouldn't be doing this," Elena whispered for the 3rd time. "Not after what happened to Harrison." Shella ignored her sister-in-law's protests and inserted the key into the chest's elaborate lock. The mechanism turned with surprising ease, as if it had been waiting decades for this moment. The heavy lid creaked open, releasing the musty scent of old paper and something else. Something metallic that made her stomach lurch. Inside lay stacks of documents bound in red ribbon, their edges yellowed with age. But it was the object resting on top that made Shella's breath catch in her throat. A leather-bound journal, its cover marked with the same strange symbol they'd found carved into Harrison's forehead. "Don't touch it," Marcus warned, his voice sharp with fear. But Shella was already reaching for the journal, her fingers brushing against its worn surface. The moment skin met leather, the temperature in the room plummeted. Her breath came out in visible puffs as she carefully opened to the first page. The writing was in her grandmother's careful script, But the words made her blood run cold. The Blackwood Covenant, a record of sacrifices made and prices paid. What does it say? Elena demanded, moving closer, despite her obvious terror. Sheila read aloud, her voice barely above a whisper. September 15th, 1923. The ritual is complete. Charles Pemberton's life was the price for the Blackwood fortune, as demanded by those who came before. The family prospers, but the debt must be paid in each generation. The pages that followed detailed a horrifying pattern spanning nearly a century. Names, dates, methods of death, all carefully catalogued in her grandmother's meticulous handwriting. The Blackwoods had built their wealth on blood, each generation sacrificing someone close to them to maintain their prosperity. "This is insane," Marcus muttered, but his face had gone pale. "Your grandmother was obviously mentally ill." Sheila continued reading, her heart pounding as the entries grew more recent. Her grandfather's death in 1967, listed as a willing sacrifice to secure the family's oil investments. Her uncle Thomas in 1985, whose accidental drowning had apparently guaranteed her father's business success. Then she reached the final entry, dated just 3 months before her grandmother's death. The covenant demands fresh blood for the transition of power. The pregnant heir carries new life, but life must be taken to preserve the family's strength. Harrison Whitmore's been marked. The journal slipped from Sheila's numb fingers, hitting the floor with a dull thud. The baby kicked violently in her womb, as if responding to her mother's horror. "Harrison," she gasped. "They killed Harrison because I inherited this place." Elena's face crumpled. "No, that's impossible. This is just the ravings of a sick old woman." But even as she spoke, they could hear movement in the mansion above. Footsteps that shouldn't be there, considering they'd locked all the doors. Marcus grabbed a poker from the fireplace that heated the hidden room, his knuckles white around the iron shaft. Sheila forced herself to pick up the journal again, flipping to the back pages. Her grandmother had left detailed instructions for breaking the covenant, but the process required something that made Sheila's blood freeze, the willing sacrifice of the current heir's firstborn. "No," she whispered, one hand instinctively protecting her belly. "There has to be another way." The footsteps above grew louder, more purposeful. Someone, or something, was searching the mansion, moving room by room toward the hidden entrance. Elena grabbed Sheila's arm, her fingernails digging into flesh. "We need to leave, now." But Sheila was transfixed by the final page of the journal. In shaking handwriting, very different from her grandmother's usual precise script, were the words, "I tried to break the cycle. I refused to name an heir. But they're coming for you anyway, my darling Sheila. The Blackwood blood calls to them. Forgive me for what I've brought upon your family." A loud crash echoed from upstairs, followed by the sound of splintering wood. Whatever was hunting them had found the entrance to the library. Marcus grabbed the documents from the chest, stuffing them into a canvas bag. "There's got to be another way out of here." Sheila noticed a narrow passage behind the chest, barely visible in the flickering candlelight. As footsteps began descending the hidden staircase, she clutched the journal to her chest and pointed toward the opening. "There," she breathed. They squeezed through the passage, just as shadows filled the room behind them, accompanied by whispers in a language that predated human civilization. The Covenant's guardians had finally come to collect their due. The photograph trembled in Sheila's hands as she studied the faces staring back at her. Her grandmother Eleanor stood beside a man she'd never seen before, tall, distinguished, wearing an expensive suit that screamed old money. But it was the woman on his other side that made Sheila's blood run cold. Even 50 years younger, Margaret Blackwood's calculating eyes were unmistakable. "They knew each other," she whispered to Marcus, who was still examining the documents scattered across the hidden desk. "My grandmother and your family, they had some kind of relationship." Marcus looked up sharply, abandoning the papers to peer over her shoulder. His face went ashen. "That's my grandfather, Richard Blackwood. But how—" "The development deal," Sheila breathed, pieces clicking together like puzzle fragments. "This land, this mansion, It wasn't random that your family wanted it so badly. A floorboard creaked overhead, freezing them both. Marcus grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the back of the hidden room where shadows offered some concealment. They listened, hearts pounding, as footsteps moved methodically across the floor above. "Someone's in the house," Marcus mouthed silently. Shella's mind raced. The front door had been locked when they arrived. She'd been certain they were alone. The footsteps paused directly overhead, and she could swear whoever it was remained still for a long moment, as if listening for sounds below. Then the footsteps resumed, moving toward the staircase with deliberate purpose. Marcus pointed to another door she hadn't noticed before, partially hidden behind a tall bookshelf. They moved toward it as quietly as possible, but the wooden floor beneath their feet seemed determined to betray every step. The door opened onto a narrow servant's staircase that led down into darkness. Behind them, they heard the hidden room's entrance mechanism activate with a soft click. Someone else knew about the secret panel. They descended the narrow stairs by feel, Marcus's hand on her shoulder to steady her as she navigated in the pitch black. The staircase was steep and old, each step threatening to creak or give way entirely. Her pregnancy made her movements awkward, and she fought against the dizziness that threatened to overwhelm her. The stairs ended in what felt like a basement corridor. Marcus fumbled for his phone's flashlight, casting a weak beam down a stone-walled passage that stretched ahead of them. The air was thick with dust and the smell of decay. "Where does this lead?" Shella whispered. "Storage areas, maybe." Or, he stopped abruptly as voices echoed down from above. Two distinct speakers, though the words were muffled by distance and stone. They pressed forward through the narrow corridor, passing several doors that opened onto empty storage rooms filled with decades of accumulated junk. At the corridor's end, they found a heavy wooden door with an old-fashioned iron latch. Marcus lifted the latch carefully, and the door swung open onto blessed fresh air and moonlight. They emerged behind the mansion, near the overgrown garden that backed up to the woods. "The car," Shella said urgently. They'd parked in front of the house, which meant retrieving it would require circling around and potentially exposing themselves to whoever was inside. "Leave it," Marcus decided. "We'll cut through the woods to the main road and call for help." But as they started toward the tree line, headlights swept across the mansion's front drive. Another car was arriving, or perhaps leaving. They crouched behind an old garden shed, watching as a sleek black sedan pulled away and disappeared down the winding driveway. "Did you see who it was?" Shella asked. Marcus shook his head, but his expression was grim. "Same kind of car my mother drives, same kind half the Blackwood family drives." They waited several more minutes before cautiously approaching the mansion again. The house stood dark and silent, but Shella couldn't shake the feeling they were still being watched. When they finally reached Marcus's car, she noticed something that made her stomach lurch. The driver's side window had been smashed, and glass fragments littered the ground like deadly confetti. On the dashboard, held down by a piece of the broken glass, was a note written in elegant handwriting. "Some family secrets should stay buried. Stop digging before someone gets hurt." "That's my mother's handwriting," Marcus said quietly, staring at the note with a mixture of disbelief and growing anger. "She was here. She's been watching us." Shella felt something twist in her chest, not the baby moving, but pure fear crystallizing into determination. "Then she knows we're getting close to something she doesn't want us to find." Marcus started the car despite the broken window, cold night air rushing in as they drove away from the mansion. Neither of them spoke for several miles, both lost in their own thoughts about what they'd discovered and what it might mean. But Shella kept thinking about the photograph, about her grandmother's face beside the Blackwoods. Whatever secrets lay buried in that mansion's past, they were worth killing for. The morning light filtered through the mansion's grimy windows as Shella crept down the servants' staircase, her heart hammering against her ribs. Every creak of the old wood beneath her feet sounded like thunder in the oppressive silence. She clutched the leather portfolio against her chest, its contents representing both salvation and damnation. Behind her, she could hear Marcus stirring in their bedroom, his voice calling her name with increasing urgency. She had perhaps minutes before he discovered her absence, before he realized what she had taken from the hidden room. The kitchen door stood slightly ajar, and through the gap she could see Detective Morrison's silhouette against the pale dawn. He turned as she approached, his weathered face grave with concern. "Mrs. Blackwood, are you certain about this? Once we open this investigation, there's no going back. Your husband's family will destroy me either way," Shella finished, her voice steadier than she felt. "At least this way, the truth comes out." Morrison nodded slowly, accepting the portfolio with careful hands. As he opened it, his eyebrows rose at the sight of the documents within. Bank statements, property deeds, and most damning of all, the correspondence between Victoria Blackwood and the Swiss accounts that had been bleeding money from charitable foundations for decades. "My God," he whispered, scanning the papers. "This implicates half the city's elite. The Blackwood Foundation, the Children's Hospital Board, even the mayor's office." His eyes met hers. "You understand what this means? Your child will grow up with this shadow hanging over the family name." Shella's hand instinctively moved to her rounded belly. The baby kicked as if responding to her touch, and she drew strength from that small movement. "My child will grow up knowing that sometimes doing the right thing requires sacrifice." The sound of heavy footsteps echoed from the main staircase. Morrison quickly closed the portfolio and moved toward the back door. "I'll have units here within the hour. Stay close to the phone, and whatever you do, don't let them know you've spoken to me." As the detective vanished into the morning mist, Shella turned to find Victoria Blackwood standing in the kitchen doorway. The older woman's silver hair was perfectly coiffed, despite the early hour, and her steel-grey eyes held a mixture of disappointment and cold fury. "I'd hoped it wouldn't come to this," Victoria said, stepping into the room with predatory grace. "When Harold told me about your little discovery, I thought perhaps we could reach an understanding." "An understanding?" Shella backed toward the counter, her mind racing. "You mean like the understanding you had with my grandmother? The one that ended with her death?" Victoria's laugh was like breaking glass. Eleanor was a foolish woman who didn't know when to leave well enough alone. She found those documents years ago, you know. Started asking uncomfortable questions about where the foundation money was really going. The admission hit Shella like a physical blow. "You killed her." "I protected my family," Victoria corrected, her voice never wavering. "Just as I'm prepared to protect them now." "You have no idea what you're tampering with, child. The Blackwood name opens doors, creates opportunities, changes lives. The small price we exact for that privilege is nothing compared to the good we do." "Small price?" Shella's voice cracked with disbelief. "You've stolen millions from sick children, from homeless shelters, from causes that would have squandered the money anyway," Victoria snapped. "We put it to better use, created lasting legacies, built an empire that will endure for generations." Marcus appeared behind his mother, his face a mask of conflicted emotions. "Shella, please, just give us the documents and this can all go away. We can make this right." "Can you bring my grandmother back?" The words erupted from Shella's lips with volcanic force. "Can you undo decades of theft? Can you explain to the families who lost loved ones because the money meant for their care ended up in your offshore accounts?" Victoria's composure finally cracked. "You sanctimonious little fool. You think your moral high ground will protect you? Will provide for your child? We are offering you everything. Wealth, position, security. And you would throw it all away for what? Justice?" The word hung in the air between them like a challenge. Through the window, Shella could see the first police car turning up the long driveway, its lights flashing but sirens silent. Relief flooded through her, followed immediately by a bone-deep exhaustion. "Yes," she said quietly, "for justice." Victoria followed her gaze to the approaching vehicle, and for the first time since Shella had known her, the Iron Matriarch looked genuinely afraid. "You have no idea what you've done," she whispered, "what you've set in motion." Marcus moved toward his wife, his hand outstretched. "Shella, please." But she was already walking toward the front door. toward the police, toward an uncertain future that was nonetheless her own. Behind her, she heard Victoria's voice, cold and final, "This isn't over." The baby kicked again, stronger this time, and Shella smiled despite everything. Some fights were worth having. The metallic taste of fear coated Shella's mouth as she pressed herself against the cold stone wall of the hidden passage. Above, footsteps echoed through the mansion's floorboards, deliberate, searching. Marcus had brought reinforcements, and they were systematically combing through every room. Her phone had no signal in the depths of the mansion's foundations. The ancient stones seemed to swallow modern conveniences whole, leaving her isolated with secrets that men would kill for. The leather portfolio containing her grandmother's research felt heavy in her trembling hands, its contents now fully comprehensible after hours of desperate study. Eleanor hadn't just been an eccentric old woman collecting antiques. She'd been a guardian, protecting a network of resistance operatives whose identities were still classified 70 years later. The names in those documents, politicians, CEOs, foreign dignitaries, all had ancestors who'd collaborated with or fought against the Nazi regime. Some had built empires on stolen wealth. Others had sacrificed everything for freedom. The baby shifted restlessly inside her, responding to her elevated heart rate. Shella placed a protective hand over her belly, whispering silent promises. Whatever happened, her child would not pay for her grandmother's secrets. A new sound filtered down from above, the splintering of wood. They were breaking down doors now, abandoning any pretense of subtlety. How long before they discovered the hidden entrance behind the library's false panel? Shella forced herself to move deeper into the passage, her phone's flashlight creating dancing shadows on the walls. The narrow corridor branched ahead, and she paused, trying to remember the crude map Eleanor had sketched in the margins of her journal. Left led to the old wine cellar. Right continued to what her grandmother had cryptically labeled as the final insurance. The sound of voices grew closer. Marcus's cultured tone carried clearly through the stone. "Mrs. Chen, your cooperation would be appreciated. We know she's here somewhere." Mrs. Chen's response was muffled but defiant. Shella's throat tightened with guilt. Her elderly neighbor was in danger because of her, because of secrets she'd never asked to inherit. She turned right, following the passage as it sloped downward. The air grew thicker, mustier, carrying the weight of decades. Her flashlight beam revealed another door ahead, this one modern, a steel security door that looked jarringly out of place among the medieval stonework. The handle turned easily under her touch, revealing a small chamber beyond. Shella stepped inside and gasped. The room was a miniature museum, its walls lined with display cases containing documents, photographs, and artifacts. But more importantly, it contained modern equipment: computers, communication devices, backup power systems. A red light blinked steadily on what appeared to be a secure phone. Without hesitation, Shella lifted the receiver. The line connected immediately. "Nightingale protocol activated," a crisp male voice said. "State your emergency." "This is Shella Morrison. I'm Eleanor Blackwood's granddaughter. Armed men are searching my property for her research. They've already killed someone." A pause. Authentication required. What was Eleanor's favorite flower? Shella's mind raced through childhood memories. Forget-me-nots. She said they were reminders that some things should never be forgotten. Confirmed. Extraction team en route. Estimated arrival 12 minutes. Can you maintain your position? I think so. But there's an elderly woman upstairs. Mrs. Chen is already secure. We've been monitoring the situation since the break-in at your apartment. Relief flooded through her. You've been watching? Eleanor Blackwood was one of our most valued assets. Her death triggered certain protocols. We've been waiting for you to discover her legacy. Above, the sounds of destruction grew more violent. Something heavy crashed to the floor, followed by Marcus's angry shouts. They were getting frustrated, which made them more dangerous. "The documents I found," Shella whispered. "Are they really worth killing for? The information your grandmother protected could destabilize governments, topple corporations, expose war crimes that powerful people believed were buried forever. Yes, Miss Morrison, it's worth killing for. It's also worth dying to protect. The weight of responsibility settled on her shoulders like a physical burden. She wasn't just a pregnant woman hiding in a basement anymore. She was the keeper of history's most dangerous secrets. What happens now? Now you wait, and when this is over, you'll have a choice to make. Walk away and live a normal life, or take up your grandmother's mantle. Either way, you'll be protected. A distant explosion shook the mansion's foundation. Dust rained from the ceiling as emergency lighting flickered on throughout the hidden chamber. "They found the passage," the voice said grimly. "Stay calm. Help is almost there." Shella clutched the phone tighter as footsteps echoed in the corridor beyond. The baby kicked hard against her ribs, as if sensing the approaching danger. Whatever choice awaited her, survival came first, for both of them. The steel door's locks engaged automatically as shadows appeared in the passage beyond. The ambulance sirens faded into the distance as Shella stood in the mansion's foyer, her hands trembling against her swollen belly. Detective Morrison closed his notebook with a sharp snap, his weathered face etched with concern. "Mrs. Blackwood, I need you to understand the gravity of what happened here tonight," he said, his voice cutting through the eerie silence that had settled over the house. "Your mother-in-law attempted murder. The poison she slipped into your tea, if you hadn't noticed the bitter taste and stopped drinking." Shella's legs gave way and she sank onto the dusty velvet chair near the entrance. The baby kicked hard against her ribs, as if sensing her distress. "She knew about the documents," she whispered, "about what grandmother left me." Morrison nodded grimly. "The Rothschild letters, the land deeds, the Nazi gold certificates. Your grandmother documented everything. But someone's been watching, waiting. The question is, how many people know what you found in that hidden room?" Through the tall windows, headlights swept across the circular drive. Shella's heart lurched as she recognized Marcus's BMW pulling up behind the police cars. He burst through the front door moments later, his usually pristine appearance disheveled, his tie askew. "Shella, my God, what happened?" "They called and said Mother was arrested, that she—" He stopped abruptly, taking in the scene, the overturned teacup on the side table, the evidence bags in Morrison's hands, his wife's pale, stricken face. "Your mother tried to kill me, Marcus," Shella said quietly. "She tried to kill our baby." The color drained from Marcus's face. "That's impossible. Mother would never—" "She confessed," Morrison interrupted. "Mrs. Victoria Blackwood admitted to purchasing strychnine with intent to poison your wife. She believed that by eliminating Mrs. Shella Blackwood, the inheritance would revert to your family." Marcus staggered backward, gripping the doorframe. "The inheritance? What inheritance could possibly be worth?" His eyes widened as realization dawned. "The room. You found something in that room." Shella watched her husband's face carefully, searching for any sign of prior knowledge, any hint that he'd been complicit in his family's schemes. But she saw only genuine shock and dawning horror. "Marcus," she said slowly, "did you know your family has been searching this house for decades? That your great-grandfather worked with the Nazis during the war? What are you talking about?" Marcus's voice cracked. "That's insane. Our family fought against—" "The documents tell a different story," Morrison interjected, pulling out photocopies from his briefcase. "We found correspondence between Heinrich Blackwood and SS officers detailing the transportation of stolen artifacts and gold. Your family's fortune wasn't built on legitimate business ventures, Mr. Blackwood. It was built on blood money." Marcus slumped against the wall, his face ashen. "I didn't know. I swear to you, Shella, I had no idea. But Mother, she always talked about this house, about grandmother's hidden treasures. I thought she meant jewelry, family heirlooms." "She knew," Shella said, her voice growing stronger despite her exhaustion. "She knew exactly what was hidden here, and she was willing to murder her own grandchild to get it back." The baby kicked again, harder this time, and Shella winced. Morrison noticed immediately. Mrs. Blackwood, you need medical attention. The stress, the poison exposure. No, Shella said firmly. Not yet. We need to finish this tonight. Marcus, there's something else you need to know. She struggled to her feet, one hand bracing her back. Your mother wasn't working alone. Someone's been feeding her information about my investigation, about what I found. Marcus's eyes narrowed. What do you mean? She knew too much, too quickly. She knew about the letters before I'd even finished reading them. Someone with access to this house. Someone who's been watching me. A floorboard creaked overhead. All three of them froze, eyes turning toward the ceiling. Morrison's hand moved instinctively to his weapon. I thought you said you cleared the house, Shella whispered. We did, Morrison replied, but his voice carried uncertainty. Another creak, this one closer to the staircase. Marcus stepped protectively in front of Shella. Could be the house settling. These old places. The lights went out. In the sudden darkness, Shella heard Morrison curse under his breath, heard the metallic click of his gun being drawn. Emergency lighting from the police cars outside cast eerie shadows through the windows, creating a maze of dark shapes and silver highlights. Stay close, Morrison commanded in a harsh whisper. Someone's still here. Footsteps echoed from the second floor, deliberate, measured steps moving toward the hidden room, toward the secrets that had already cost so much blood. Shella pressed both hands to her belly, feeling the baby's frantic movements. Whatever was about to unfold in the darkness above, she knew it would determine not just her fate, but the fate of the new life she carried and the deadly legacy her grandmother had left behind. The sirens wailed in the distance as Shella pressed her back against the crumbling brick wall of the hidden chamber, her heart hammering against her ribs. The manuscript, trembling in her hands, contained everything. Proof of the Blackwood family, century-long embezzlement scheme, documented evidence of murders disguised as accidents, and most damning of all, receipts showing how they'd been systematically draining the inheritance trusts of dozens of families for generations. Victoria Blackwood stood in the doorway, no longer the composed matriarch, but a cornered predator with wild eyes and a gun that caught the dim light filtering through the basement window. Behind her, Margaret clutched a crowbar with white knuckles, while Charles fumbled with his phone, desperately trying to delete files from what appeared to be offshore banking applications. You stupid girl, Victoria hissed, her cultured voice cracking. You should have been grateful for the scraps we threw you, should have let us demolish this cursed house and build our development. But no, you had to go digging. Shella's free hand instinctively moved to her swollen belly, feeling the baby's restless movement as if sensing the danger. The police already know, Victoria. Detective Morrison has copies of everything. Lies, but uncertainty flickered across the older woman's face. The truth was, Shella had only managed to send Morrison a cryptic text before the Blackwoods cornered her. She'd discovered this final chamber just an hour ago, hidden behind what she'd assumed was solid foundation stone. Her grandmother's journal had contained one last clue, written in the margin of a recipe for apple pie. The sweetest treasures hide where the foundation meets the earth. Margaret stepped forward, raising the crowbar. We can still fix this. Make it look like an accident. Pregnant woman falls down basement stairs in condemned house. Enough, Charles snapped, pocketing his phone. The accounts are clean. If we handle this right, it's our word against a dead woman's theories. Shella felt the familiar steel that had carried her through poverty, through their constant humiliation, through months of discovering her grandmother's breadcrumb trail of hidden truths. You're forgetting something, Charles. What's that? I already transferred the digital files to cloud storage, and I wasn't just texting the police. She held up her phone, screen still glowing. I've been live streaming to my social media for the past 30 minutes. Everyone can see exactly where I am and who's threatening me. Victoria's face went ashen. You're bluffing. Am I? Check the viewer count. Shella kept her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Funny how quickly things go viral when they involve wealthy families and hidden murder rooms. The sirens were getting closer now, and Shella could hear car doors slamming outside. Victoria's grip on the gun wavered as footsteps thundered overhead. "Mrs. Chen, police, where are you?" "Down here," Sheila called out, never taking her eyes off Victoria. "In the basement." The older woman's composure finally cracked completely. 40 years, she whispered. 40 years of building our empire, of maintaining our position, and you, some nobody from the gutter. You think you can destroy us? "I don't have to destroy you," Sheila replied quietly. "You already destroyed yourselves. I just found the evidence." Heavy boots clanged down the wooden stairs. Detective Morrison appeared first, weapon drawn, followed by 3 uniformed officers. The basement suddenly felt crowded as the police quickly assessed the situation and moved to disarm the Blackwoods. "Drop the weapons. Hands where I can see them." Victoria let the gun clatter to the floor, her shoulders sagging in defeat. Margaret released the crowbar with a metallic ring. Charles raised his hands, already calculating legal strategies and plea bargains. As the officers cuffed the 3 family members and read them their rights, Morrison approached Sheila carefully. "Are you hurt? The baby?" "We're okay," she managed, surprised by how much her voice was shaking now that the immediate danger had passed. She handed him the manuscript. "This is the original documentation. My grandmother kept records of everything, every theft, every cover-up, every accident they orchestrated to keep their secrets buried." Morrison whistled low as he flipped through pages of meticulous handwriting and photocopied documents. "Your grandmother was quite the investigator." "She was protecting me," Sheila said, watching as Victoria was led upstairs in handcuffs. All those years of seeming like a crazy old woman hoarding junk, she was actually building a case, hiding the evidence where only someone who truly loved this house would ever find it. 2 hours later, as crime scene photographers documented the hidden chamber and forensics teams carefully catalogued its contents, Sheila sat on the mansion's front steps. The live stream had indeed gone viral, with major news outlets already picking up the story. Her phone buzzed constantly with interview requests and messages of support. The Blackwood Empire was crumbling, but for the first time since inheriting this broken-down house, Sheila felt truly rich. She had something no amount of money could buy, the truth and the strength her grandmother had passed down to her, along with the deed to this remarkable, terrible, wonderful house.